Welcome to Demographics, which is the 60-second Crossing Thin Ice podcast. Today, we're looking at how changing demographics that are occurring globally affect economic growth, specifically GDP, over the next few decades. I am joined today, as always, by Max Rudolph, who will drill down on the surprising story of global demographics. The new trends in demography are nearly universal throughout the world, with a few exceptions. Max will tell us about three important exceptions: China, the US, and sub-Saharan Africa. But before we get started, we do want to remind you that nothing in today's podcast is investment advice. We are here to educate and entertain risk managers and senior officers at insurers with our opinions about risk and risk management topics. So let's get started.
Economic success is typically measured by growth in gross domestic product, or GDP. Expectations are for GDP growth to slow over the next few decades, in part due to overextended government spending and other headwinds, but mostly due to the cost of extreme weather events due to global warming. A slowing GDP is not bad if it is associated with more sustainable government spending and reductions in greenhouse gases that lead to greater biodiversity that makes future life more viable. Those who build scenarios today to prepare for a variety of outcomes will be better able to adjust to actual events. Population size is a primary driver of GDP, along with productivity. The global population may reach 10 billion in this century, arguably a number so high that tipping points will be reached that impact the future of humans on Earth. Since GDP equals population times productivity per person, we can derive the percentage change in GDP as the sum of the percentage changes in each of population and productivity per person. This growth means that most countries have had a tailwind behind economic growth as populations grew nearly continuously since the beginning of the industrial era. That's unlikely to be true going forward, as the break-even fertility rate of 2.1 children per female over her lifetime is not being met in the developed countries and continues to fall nearly everywhere. In the US, the rate is 1.63, and in countries like South Korea, it is well below 1. The repealed one-child policy in China built a culture where a single grandchild may have 4 grandparents to dote on them. Only in sub-Saharan Africa are populations expected to grow. Climate change becomes another factor as heat and drought are creating areas near the equator that are uninhabitable, and others are uninsurable, leading to expected climate migration. The United Nations projects population by country to the year 2100, using recent data to build models that I think of as Markov chains for those who remember their matrix algebra studies. Current populations are broken down by age and sex, using trends and recent levels of fertility, mortality, and immigration rates. China is expected to have a precipitous rise in the number of elderly that could become greater than the number of workers. This seems unlikely to be sustainable politically and represents an extreme of what will be a common issue. Russia has low fertility rates, made worse by sending many young soldiers to war. The United States is only expected to grow because of immigration, but will initially be able to observe the solutions that others offer and hopefully learn from them. Countries like Nigeria seem to have the winning hand in this scenario. Their fertility rates are falling, but remain above the sustainable rate. Their dependents are much more likely to be young than old for many years to come. Countries with declining populations that reach out and build relationships with countries in sub-Saharan Africa will receive trained workers with the drive to succeed. Those who don't will be more susceptible to worker shortages, especially in senior-related service industries. Population models assume smooth growth rates, while we know that events such as infectious diseases, wars, and famine create discontinuities. Ben Franklin and Thomas Malthus knew that population growth depends on general economic expectations. Today's youth are concerned about the environment, feelings of uncertainty, and nuclear war, causing some to choose not to have children. This could be a factor leading to a future regime change. A receding population could result in a falling GDP metric and interact with other risks as a threat multiplier that amplifies the negative impact. Studies show that we don't often plan for events that have not happened in the recent past. So performing stress tests or reverse engineering from a specific outcome could prove useful. There are a number of headwinds to GDP growth in our path, offset by potential productivity gains from technology. Lower economic growth is likely over the next 75 years relative to the period since World War II. Areas of concern include high levels of debt, monoculture in agriculture, think of the potato famine, prior growth from adding educated females to the workforce, reduced opportunities for specific minority groups, reduced belief in science, and fewer college graduates. And we are aging. The elderly convert equities to fixed income or cash, negating the economy from potential growth due to investment. A minor improvement would be to focus on the metric GDP per person rather than GDP, as population is likely to peak soon, and a per person metric may be easier to set expectations around. The Earth has come to be dominated by humans in a way that will not be overcome without discontinuities. A low fertility rate may be healthy for our survival, with reduced population allowing areas to be recaptured by wild plants and animals. Biodiversity and phenology seem to be at a tipping point, with creatures like bees that we depend on to pollinate our food supply enduring recurring mortality events. Climate change is forcing people away from some areas that will become uninhabitable due to things like sea level rise, freshwater depletion, and drought. Planning that identifies climate havens can provide sustainable living areas within an economy that is planned around it. This has happened in the past in many towns across America. Federal and state subsidies can build up infrastructure quickly to increase the likelihood of success. Particularly important components that pure free markets don't always support include childcare and grocery stores. Population momentum changes slowly. Only when we see a discontinuity due to war or famine does it begin to concern us. But a gradual reduction of humans would have side benefits such as reducing pollution and improving water scarcity. Risk managers can consider how this impacts their business and if adjustments are necessary. Thinking earlier and across a longer time horizon provides more options and a competitive advantage. Preparing for reducing population at local, national, and international levels can lead to appropriate planning with right-sized GDP a result.
So, Max, what does this demographic evolution mean for the insurance market?
Well, Dave, a greater number of elderly people certainly increases the need for insurance products tied to things like estate planning, longevity, and nursing home care. You see a very competitive market selling products like pension risk transfer, products that increase the assets under management for the company. This is where companies that sponsor a pension plan sell the liabilities to an insurer who will often process the payments too. I definitely worry that it requires an investment illiquidity premium or excess credit risk to be in this market. It's very competitive. I worry that the private credit markets that are used today and private ratings relied upon will ultimately come up short when backing these retiree benefits that have lost their federal government guarantees. Dave, what are your thoughts on demographics in the insurance market?
Well, Max, I think that people that are looking to optimize their results are going to start looking at this demographic issue in terms of their ALM program. Uh, right now, we tend to look at, or sometimes we look at ALM in terms of a kind of a cohort approach to it, where we take business from a particular issue year or something and look at it through, and then sometimes we look at the portfolio. With this demographic evolution, the characteristics of our portfolios are likely to be changing. And so we might want to project that ahead and look and see how does that change our ALM strategy. because there may be ways of optimizing our investments within that changing portfolio of liabilities. So, Max, let me get back to you here. The U.S. is aging and extreme weather is increasing at the same time. Is it possible for this to work out well? What do you think would be an example of a bad scenario here?
Well, this is certainly something that I think about a lot. The combination of these risks amplify each other. Each is termed a threat multiplier, so it is a great concern. The risks feed off each other, and an aging population has negative fiscal implications with fewer people working and paying taxes, with more elderly receiving various benefits they've earned, but the government did not accrue for. This leaves fewer dollars available to pay for extreme weather events and to prepare for them, as well as other needs and wants like education or healthcare. One solution, unpopular with many, is immigration. This would bring in working age people who pay taxes. Absent that, either taxes will need to rise or benefits to the elderly will have to go down.
So let's pivot, Max, and look at Africa, where the demographic situation is pretty significantly different than the rest of the world. How will countries succeed in this view in Africa?
Well, the interaction of countries with the countries, especially sub-Saharan countries in Africa, is really the key to the next century. Countries in the developed world are aging, and will have trouble supporting service type people who take care of those elderly. So you really need to have a relationship with the countries in Africa. And the key to success in Africa, based on really their preferable demographics, is likely based on soft power. What country or region is perceived as being supportive of an African's best interests? That's the question to answer. What not to do is what countries have done so far. You don't take resources when loans are not repaid, as China has done, or put countries on a travel ban list, as the U.S. is doing today. I think soft power is the key, built around education. Teach English as a second language. Develop native teachers. They've been abandoned. The locals have been abandoned in the past when external experts have really used natives only as laborers. Build an infrastructure for healthcare, and help to maintain the peace. Don't be Big Brother, but look for shared successes with these countries. This will create a population that seeks out your country as one with opportunities.
Well, let's turn the lens back on ourselves here in the U.S. How can the U.S. maintain a strong GDP growth here with the demographic situation without immigration?
Yeah, forgive me a brief mathematical diversion. Growth in gross domestic product or GDP is the sum of its components growth. So you add the percentage changes in population and productivity. Even if population falls, I think there's quite a few ideas that would help increase productivity, especially among the lowest socioeconomic classes. When we help them, in my view, through infrastructure that creates banks and schools and grocery stores and retail, that do not need to be propped up over time, and we invest locally, we allow creation of vibrant communities. It's like the old saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime.
That's great. Well, as we're hopping around the globe here, let's jump over to Asia and tell me about what you see as China and what's a worst case for them.
Yeah, China is going to be really interesting to follow over the next couple of decades. The fact that China is a global economic and military power with the largest population today, it makes it a great case to study, but a scary one to experience. There's a fast-growing elderly population with a limited safety net. So, with a low fertility rate, so fewer children are being born. Some simulations of the old age dependency ratio takes it above two, meaning two old people for every worker. How is that sustainable? This puts stress on their political and social frameworks at a time before they've created a stable middle class and could really create quite a bit of chaos. Analyst Peter Zion expects a meltdown within 10 years, and it does not appear that succession planning or alternative strategies have been a priority to be considered. It could take another generation or more to get their feet back under them. We worry about a conflict over Taiwan, but a clock is ticking as China builds up its military at the same time as their pool of young males gets smaller. As scarce objects in a shrinking pool, they're going to be protected by their family. It's going to be harder and harder for them to be, drafted as just grunts to be thrown into a war. In the long run, the elderly are going to need to work longer than they expected to, and something, perhaps some form of patriotic vigor, will lead to higher fertility rates. Russia is another example. They're estimated to reach 1 million fatalities from their war in Ukraine soon, and their fertility rate is already abysmally low. Their future needs to expand beyond nuclear weapons, oil, and natural gas is really the key for them to develop other things that are positive for their economy. These are examples of demographic time bombs that will reconfigure the world in unexpected ways if solutions aren't found.
Oh my. Well, so Max, as you looked at this in individual countries, what surprised you about the demographics there?
I've got a few things that I think as I think about it are maybe a little disjointed, but make sense to me. So hopefully we'll the reader will be able, or the listener will be able to follow. The demographics for individual countries. This is true for individuals and companies too, but countries seem to ignore time horizons longer than the current political term limit. No surprise there. Demographics is destiny and can be readily modeled absent discontinuities from wars and pandemics, but the implications seem to be ignored by choice. Think tanks should be frantically planning around demographics and climate change and how those two interact. We know that most elderly are no longer earning income, so most are done accumulating and starting to decumulate their assets. This creates less demand for assets and more supply, so prices of all types of assets should be expected to fall along with interest rates. One of the major assumptions we make as modelers is that fiscal and monetary policy will work, that the large imbalances due to loose policies over the last 25 years won't create an environment where market forces overwhelm government policy as they did in the 1970s. A few years ago, I suggested that modelers make sure their software could handle negative interest rates. And today, I think you should run a stagflation scenario so you have an idea of what the impact might be. Who knows? Maybe it has positive repercussions for your block of business. I've also been a broken record for a while about the impact on insurance products when asset assumptions are not predictable for the length of the liability contract. Combined with climate expenses, higher security costs due to terrorism going forward, and the bubble created by loose fiscal and monetary policy, the lower yields on assets due to the increasing number of elderly lead me to think that all insurance is underpriced because yields on reinvestments will be lower than expected. Risk managers should think about the margin of safety in interest rates. How low can rates go before you have real concerns about income or even solvency? Do the same reverse stress tests for hailstorms and hurricanes. How would an anthrax attack impact your block of business? This initially can be done on the back of an envelope, but material risk should have models built.
Well, Max, one thing you said there reminded me of an experience I had when interest rates were first dropping down after the big bubble in interest rates in the 80s, throughout the 90s, into the beginning of the century here. And I went to do an ALM project and ran the stochastic interest rate generator that we used, and it didn't work. It turns out that below a certain level of interest rates, that particular mathematics of that generator never produced an interest rate that went up enough because it was working off of a percentage change in interest rates. And when you have the interest rates very small, there's never a percentage change that gets it to go up. So we had to scramble to finish the project by adapting our model on the fly, which was a very bad day. So, Max, tell me, have you noticed any evidence that folks have been looking at this problem before? Has any demographic studies been done in the long past? Are there instances, for instance, that show up in literature or somewhere else that refer to it?
Well, this is one of my favorite stories to say about demographics, and I became aware of it uh, in initially from NPR's Planet Money podcast. So shout out to them for sharing this. But Charles Dickens in A Christmas Carol, everybody's favorite play at Christmas time, makes a reference to demographics that builds off work from Ben Franklin and Thomas Malthus. At the very beginning of the story, they knock on Scrooge's door, essentially locals that are looking to raise money for the local orphanage. And they say, if you don't give money, these children will die. And Scrooge's response is, well, they should just get on about it and die and quit asking me for money. Um, but it ties back to work that Franklin and Malthus did. Franklin wrote a paper in 1751 titled Observations Concerning the Increase of Mankind that noted that population grew quicker during economic booms as couples rushed to marry and have children, doing the opposite when money was scarce, when the economy was poor. Malthus used this as a basis for his book, An Essay on the Principle of Population in 1798. I can assure you from experience, this is quite dry reading. He argued, Malthus did, that linear growth of food production would not keep up with exponential population growth. And many will argue that he was wrong, but I think he was early and should continue to be studied. We've continuously pivoted through various forms of fertilizer, and the current version is polluting land and our fresh water supplies, so definitely needs to be updated, as it has been, a couple times per century for the last 500 years. There's many scenarios that create these population discontinuities, improving global warming outcomes, as long as wars are not the cause. Pandemics cause the economy to slow, while wars release massive amounts of greenhouse gases and increase global warming. These risks make it imperative that we sponsor research about how best to manage demographic issues, including interactions with other risks like climate change.
No, thanks, Max. Max, one of the benefits we get out of your discussions here is that you're always making us learn new words. So a new word that you used today was phonology. What does that mean?
Yeah, that was a word that I ran across a couple years ago and had to look it up myself. And actually, as I was writing this, I remembered what it was, but actually went back and read a little bit more about it. Biological events have evolved over billions of years slowly, so that pollinators arrive as flowers are opening, migratory patterns support those on the move, as well as the predators on their route. The temperature changes due to global warming are occurring quickly. So plants that recognize spring by soil temperatures are growing too early for the birds triggered to move by the day's length. If they do not align, the plants may not reproduce and the birds may starve. Biodiversity loss is well underway. Those of us who are near the end of our careers remember having to regularly wash windshields on a vacation due to bugs being squashed on them. Today, it's less likely as the insect population has cratered.
Thanks, Max. Finally, I want to leave you with 5 takeaways. First, slowing GDP growth is not necessarily all bad. A decline in GDP growth is expected due to these demographic changes, but this isn't entirely negative. If the population decline comes with more sustainable public spending, decarbonization, and biodiversity gains, it may represent a healthier, more viable future. The traditional growth metric of GDP may need to be reframed, perhaps focusing on GDP per capita instead of just aggregate GDP growth. Second, demographic trends will reshape the global economy. Global population growth is slowing, with fertility rates below replacement levels in most regions except sub-Saharan Africa, which is still growing. China's population will fall faster and further than most other countries, and in the U.S., immigration will make up for lower birth rates to keep population steady. This shift will alter economic dynamics in most countries. Fewer workers will be supporting more retirees, and asset decumulation by the elderly may suppress investment returns. Population momentum is powerful but slow-moving, and without significant immigration or productivity improvements, many countries face demographic headwinds that will challenge their economic models. Number 3, insurance and financial markets face a demographic squeeze. Aging populations will increase demand for products like long-term care and pension risk transfer, but insurers face a mismatch. Long-term liabilities must be funded by increasingly uncertain, low-yielding assets. Risk managers must rethink ALM strategies and conduct reverse stress tests for longevity, climate shocks, and economic stagflation scenarios. Number 4, sub-Saharan Africa may be the demographic winner. Africa's younger populations present a rare demographic tailwind, but success depends on how developed countries engage with soft power, education, healthcare, and genuine partnerships. Exploitive or paternalistic approaches such as China's debt leverage or the U.S.'s travel bans alienate these populations and miss the opportunity for mutual benefit. And fifth and final point, climate change and demographics stress will amplify the impact of each other. These two forces interact, compounding the risks. Climate-driven migration, uninsurable geographies, infrastructure strain, and conflict risks are heightened when societies are simultaneously coping with aging, asset accumulation, and underfunded social systems. Scenario planning and long horizon thinking are essential tools for risk managers and policymakers to prepare for these interconnected disruptions. Thanks for listening today. We find that this risk is more concerning than most because there's not really much uncertainty here. All of the 25-year-olds of the year 2050 will have been born by the end of this year. We know how much the adult population is likely to decline. We should not be treating this as if we have to wait to see what happens. Please share this podcast with your friends and coworkers. And if you haven't already, please subscribe so that you will get notice of future Crossing Thin Ice podcasts. Goodbye.